Good morning and happy Father's Day. I am Lee Barton, today's worship associate. Before our service begins, I'd like to call your attention to these announcements. Fingers are crossed. We plan to have a virtual celebration of Rebecca Kelly Morgan's 12-year ministry next Sunday after worship, with an informal open house to follow that day at Winchester Unitarian Society. Details to come. Winchester residents can live our values by voting on the town's affordable housing project at the special election this coming Tuesday, June 22nd, at Winchester High School. If you are a resident, we urge you to vote yes on question number 1. For details, please see our newsletter highlights. And now, let us open our hearts and minds to the spirit of worship. Good morning, and welcome to the Winchester Unitarian Society, a welcoming, caring community devoted to spiritual growth, social transformation, and environmental responsibility. Guided by Unitarian Universalist principles and drawing on diverse faith traditions, we live our values through worship, reflection, connection, and service. Here, we welcome all. People of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, people of all sexual orientations and genders, people of all incomes and abilities, people of all religious beliefs, and people with questions. To all of you who choose to be with us today, we say, welcome. This is the first of our series of summer worship services led by lay members of the congregation. Today's service is led by Linda Copeland. In our summer services, we welcome those gathered in worship to share their joys and sorrows with one another. There will soon be a time when you will be invited to post your name in the chat and then be invited to speak. In this ritual, we save announcements for other occasions, but share what is truly present for us in heart, mind, and spirit. Right after our first reflection, families with young children will be invited to transition to another room to visit with Ms. Juanita, our nursery leader, for story time. We will post that link in the chat box when it is time. After the service, and an opportunity to engage in unmuted conversation with one another, we will have a discussion about the service here in the main Zoom room at noon. Now, we will take a moment to greet one another through the chat function. And if you have some especially good news, we invite you to share it. we will be called back to worship through the ringing of the bells at our partner church in Marosvásárhely, Transylvania.
Begin our service with these words by Elizabeth Mount. From our very first breath, we reach out. We find our cues from the sun and the moon, from each parent and caregiver. We find our place in this great turning planet by turning to one another, generation to generation. We awaken to the dawn and fall asleep at the evening's end. Our life's journey is part of something greater, something simple, something divine. A flame cannot be lit without a spark. A life cannot begin without the air. And we cannot begin to find ourselves without love. May we reach out to one another. May we offer love and nurturing care. May we join together in celebration of the interdependence of our lives. In this spirit, let us worship together. I now invite Lee to light our chalice.
We gather this day in celebration of freedom, remembering the victory and unfilled promises of Juneteenth. We gather this day in recognition of the ancestors, honoring the power of good fathering in the world. We gather this day as the ancients did, on the cusp of the longest day of the year, witnessing one season turn towards the next. For the fire of dignity that burns in every human heart, for the warmth of wisdom passed from generation to generation, for the light that calls us towards a time of growth and new hope, we light our chalice. Please join in singing our opening hymn, Simple Gifts.
Tis a gift to be simple, tis a gift to be free, tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When a true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning, a turning, we come around right.
This month, we're going to be talking and thinking and wondering about listening. And listening is something that we do all the time, but there's a special kind of listening. Listening for something that we might not always hear. So I have an old story about a cricket and a coin. And it goes like this. Two people are walking down a busy city street. Everyone is rushing to and from their work and they're trying to get ahead of each other. And one of the friends turns to the other and says, "Do you hear that? It's a cricket." The other friend says, "No, I don't hear anything." The first friend said, "Listen." "Wow," says the second friend. "How did you hear that cricket with all the noise around us?" His friend responds, "It's all about how I was taught when I was growing up. It's all about what I was taught to listen for." He goes on, "Here, I'll show you something." The friend then reaches into his pocket, pulls out a handful of coins, nickels and quarters and dimes, and he drops them on the sidewalk. Everyone who was rushing by stops to listen. I wonder what you hear when you're walking down a busy street. I wonder what you hear when you're alone in your room at night. I wonder what you hear when you're listening very, very, very hard to other people talking. So think about those things. And as you go through the week, pay attention to what you hear and perhaps wonder about what you don't.
May the light within you shine before you every day. May the light within you shine before you, guide your way, guide your way. May the love we share surround you and chase your fears away. May the light within you shine before you. This we pray, this we pray.
We have now come to that time in our service when we invite people to share what is on their hearts, minds, and spirits, the joys, the sorrows, the concerns, the difficult transitions you wish to name. If you wish to participate, please put your name in the chat and I will call on you. This is a window of time in which the technology angels have given everyone the power to unmute. Please let me know if you would like to share. Liz Lentz.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to share that my mother, Mary Grace, whom another number of you have met, is not very well right now, and she was in the hospital for a few days a couple of weeks ago, and now she's at a skilled nursing facility. She's getting stronger, but I think this is going to be probably a period of transition for her in some way or another, and so we just want to invite you all to keep her in your thoughts and us too as we figure this out. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I'm lighting some candles for what we've shared in our highlights newsletter. The first one is in celebration of Chuck and Julie Kuhn's 50th wedding anniversary. And I light a second candle for our Director of Lifespan Religious Education, Rebecca Kelly Morgan, who is feeling much better, but indeed was very sick. We pray for her continued recovery. Would anyone else like to speak? I invite us into a time of prayer, and after the prayer, I will light one more candle for all of the spoken joys and sorrows, and for those that remain unspoken in our hearts. And after I light that candle, we will be together in a time of shared silence. Spirit of life and love, we ask for your loving presence with us in our fragile human lives and our fragile human bodies. We give thanks that Mary Grace is in a safe place and is regaining strength, but ask for love and mercy and grace for whatever lies ahead. We ask for strength for all those who know and love her, and those who care for her, for the road ahead. May you be with all those who are infirm in body and in spirit. May we pause and witness and celebrate the presence of enduring and resilient love in a world that is sometimes so harsh. For all of us, for all that we love, for this tender planet we share, we ask for strength, for comfort, for peace. Amen.
wild bird in lofty flight is still within or leaves thy sight, and I am thine, I rest in thee. Great Spirit, come and rest in me. The ends of earth are in thy hand, the seas dark, steep, and far off land, and I am thine, I rest in thee. Great Spirit, come and rest in me.
Today, we honor the Father in each of us. We honor those who persevere and keep going. The song Woyaya, written by Ghanaian and Caribbean musicians, means we keep going. Heaven knows where we're going, but we know within. And we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there, we know we will. Woyaya, 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 woyaya. Unitarian minister Bob Patrick says about Woyaya, the words are affirming and encouraging. He continues, this song supports my journey and affirms my best life when I show up with my questions, my curiosity, and my willingness, which he calls timid courage, to explore the path in front of me. We remember our fathers and all who supported, nurtured, and guided us. Each in our own unique way, we remember with the wisdom of our accumulated years, we realize that the fathers and mothers who went before us did the best they could. We are called as individuals and as a church community to keep showing up. We are called to question, to be curious, to have beginner's mind, and to fearlessly explore the path before us. We take each step mindful of those who went before us and those brave enough to recreate themselves to model for us the way to a fuller, meaningful life. We celebrate the bravery of our ancestors to take the cards they were dealt and live us into existence.
Thank you, Lee. Lee bravely took on scheduling the summer sermons. And he doesn't know, but I almost canceled. After I hit send, I soon realized that June 20th was Father's Day. As I sat there having one of those personal, internal yes-no conversations, I realized this was exactly the day I needed to share my sermon. In fact, a light bulb went on when I realized that my father, Paul Joseph Johnston, a man who hardly spoke, followed Unitarian Universalist principles. That day when I agreed to my sermon, I wondered, how can I talk for 15 minutes about a man who barely spoke a word? Then I realized my father spoke encyclopedias about how to live life through his actions. Reflecting back, Dad's lifetime of integrity mirrored UU values. I will always remember my 7th grade teacher, Sister Mary Judelin, a young sister of mercy, who told me after meeting my dad at parents' night that my father looked like Charlton Heston. I'd only been to a few movies and had no idea about movie stars, but I was successful finding a picture of him, and she was right. And a quick aside for those of you former Catholic school kids, Sister Judlin got married that summer. Let me describe my movie star dad. He was 6'2" with a full head of wavy dark blonde hair. He had ruddy good looks accentuated by high cheekbones and exquisite cerulean blue eyes, eyes that nearly glowed with blue light. And he had a perfect smile as well. I'm now thinking he would have made a perfect ski slope model. Now about Dad's good looks. A few years before Sister Mary Judlin was my 7th grade teacher, when I was 10, I got a good lesson in UU principles that has stayed with me my whole life. This lesson was shared by my mother, but I understood it was a shared value with my father. I was in 4th grade and had heard a 4-letter word on the school bus. My parents must have decided now was the time Mom would tell me the facts of life. After discussing the basics, I distinctly remember my mother beginning to discuss how handsome my father was. Given her talking about sex, I couldn't imagine what she was going to say or what Dad's looks had to do with anything. Well, for all of you owl people listening, Mom somehow got it right. She began to say how handsome my father was and then shared anecdotes about sitting at a drive-in and men approaching Dad. Of course, it made sense to me. He was gorgeous, so men and women would be attracted to him. I think she quickly asked me, did I have any more questions? But I could tell she really was ready to stop. I learned that day the Unitarian principle that people loved and are attracted to people, and they are free to love whomever they choose. I was 10. I do remember Dad was beautiful, but in our dysfunctional family dynamic, he nearly receded into our walls because he was so quiet. On the other hand, my mother, who was extremely extroverted, dominated every household interaction, and she was mentally ill, but never hospitalized. Let me take a step back to give you more of the early context of my dad's life. My grandmother Florence, who stood at about 5'10", and her husband Clarence, known as Shorty, conceived my father a few months after World War I ended. Dad was born at the end of 1919 and during the Spanish flu pandemic. Then the Roaring Twenties came, followed by the crash of 1929. Dad was 10 at the time of the Great Depression. He grew up in rural Western New York. As a child, he lived in a hamlet located between Buffalo and Rochester, New York. And by the age of 7, he was trapping squirrel and game in the fields around his house in all seasons, including brutal Lake Ontario effect winters. Trapping chores were done before school. Woyaya, we keep going. Heaven knows where we are going, but we know within. It wasn't until I was in middle age, I got my courage together and asked a couple questions on my visits back to Ohio. I knew so little. He always obliged me, but kept the stories spare and honest. It was probably in my 50s I really understood the trials and tribulations he encountered. It was during these talks I learned of my dad's internal strength. As a child, his parents owned a roadside motel, restaurant, and watering hole called the Maple Leaf. The maple leaf came rightly by its name because Canada, patron saint of the maple tree, was just miles away. The maple leaf was typical of its time and befit the 1950s. It was a humble strip of 8 tidy, perfectly connected, whitewashed units trimmed in pine green. And there was a Maple Leaf restaurant. It was large with a couple huge open rooms, a separate long, highly polished wooden bar, full kitchen, and my favorite part, the old-timey jukebox. In those days, it was new. As a child, I loved to press the big buttons and watch the 45s gracefully drop to the player. I was in my 50s when I heard more about Dad's early life from his second wife, Marjorie. I found out from her that my dad had been so isolated as a young child, he thought he was a very small adult. He didn't see other little people like him, and he was an only child with only a few elderly relatives. A nod to my father's solitary nature, I found out many decades later that as a young child, he peeled potatoes in the dark cellar in his home, and then later for the restaurant. Those potatoes would become the French fries on the maple leaf menu. My dad and mom actually built their first house. That in and of itself is a rather remarkable accomplishment. I saw a picture of them constructing it, but I never heard Dad talk about it. I did not live in that house, but a house that was built in the 1700s, located in a rural hamlet, similar to where Dad grew up in Western New York. Our house sat in a small dip of land, segued between a major highway and a dirt road. My pre-5 to age 8 years started in that 1700s house. I vaguely remember Dad with a beer sitting in his chair after work. That memory is quickly replaced by Dad in the same chair, guzzling milk and cream from a glass bottle delivered by the milkman. There wasn't any alcohol from there on. Maybe the setting was remote and humble, but our small patch of land was kissed by Mother, Father Nature. We had good soil, and my father had a Midas touch each summer. We had McIntosh apples. I made applesauce. We had sweet cherries, plums, chubby, tangy blackberries. Dad cultivated a large vegetable garden. We had at least 10 vegetables. We also grew rhubarb that no sugar or pie crust could fix, in my opinion. There were scuppernong, sometimes called muscadine grapes. We had abundant lilac bushes that became my flower encampments. We had hollyhocks, a flower the size of your hand that grew on tall vines. As a child, I would look at them thinking they were like Jack's massive flowering beanstalk. Dad had installed a swing from a tree. When we first lived in that house, we had an outhouse. Dad, of course, quickly remodeled to include extensive indoor plumbing. At the time, I didn't know that people in the nearby larger town had an indoor toilet. That was before the school bus would carry me away to school. I had plenty of time and space to develop my imagination. Back then, I didn't understand the bounty my father created on our property. It was just a house and a large shed, but every summer, during the short growing season, we had pure abundance. That abundance would be canned for months to come. My father didn't talk unless necessary. Necessary is a subjective word. It took a direct question for my father to talk. Usually a nod or look was his answer. I took a course called body language in graduate school. Looking back, my father was my earliest teacher of highly nuanced, nonverbal communication. Mostly one could not read his expression. At Christmas time, he always acted happy if Mom gave him Sensodyne toothpaste as regular. A couple times I heard Dad or Mom mention a friend who worked with Dad. His friend called him Paulie. That jovial sounding guy sounded foreign to my ears. Speaking of friends, Dad specifically said out loud that he had Black friends at work and when he was in the Army. My entire time in rural Western New York, I do not remember meeting any Blacks or seeing any in the town where my school was. But the signal I got from my parents was clear. In my early teens, my dad taught me about perseverance and commitment when, without speaking a word, he gave up smoking cold turkey. He had used over 2 packs a day my whole life. I was happy because the hacking in the morning stopped. My mother continued to chain smoke and died of lung disease in her 80s. I've been describing this quiet father. Imagine my surprise on my 16th birthday when my dad gave me a tiny vial of Christian Dior perfume, and then he kissed me on the cheek like a butterfly on a leaf. In his last years, my dad had dementia. His tall, square shoulders stooped over more and more. There was not much change in his communication. His bright eyes were still bright, but he focused less and less if you talked to him. For me, it felt like he was looking past me, seeing something I couldn't see. Sometimes he went looking in the garage and fixed what wasn't broken. Mostly, he wore too much outerwear, carefully layering jackets and coats, all the while acting efficient and proper. The closet became a statement about coming and going. Sometimes Marjorie found him tinkering with the car in the garage, all layered up, and she hadn't seen him leave. But before that, he lived a good and kind life. Nothing fancy here, folks. My dad's life was humble. He showed up, he didn't complain, he treated people with dignity, and taught me that everyone mattered. He built a house, he loved the earth, he grew a huge garden, he labored and provided. In my 30s, I learned from Marjorie, my dad's second wife, how a marriage could be loving. She was a Christian Scientist, and she melded well with his passion for homeopathy. I began seeing more and more flea market finds on wellness on their bookshelves. Most of all, I saw the quiet, tender caring he and Marjorie shared. She was still working when they met. He got up early to take her to work across town. He didn't want her to take the bus, and she was getting close to retirement and a pension. Years would pass, and I would witness Dad and Marjorie open their home to care for her 45-year-old daughter who died from lung cancer. My sister told me she saw my dad cry for the first time at the funeral remembrance. I did not share. I had seen Dad cry twice. He cried the day I drove away from Ohio at age 18 and a half to move to Florida. I had eloped about a month earlier. The second time I saw Dad cry, he came to visit me in Florida. He had just divorced my mother. Starting over would be very hard. Then there was a total surprise, one pilgrimage from Florida to Ohio to visit. I saw Dad tap dancing in a production of The Mikado at the senior center. He was one of the three little maids. Another special memory I will never forget was joining Dad and Marjorie at a community dance. I floated in my dad's arms. Around the dance floor, oh, the magic of it, him at 6'2" and me at 5'1". Around Dad, there was always a lot of music over the years. There was the Hawaiian music he played every morning to gently wake him up. I had heard Dad say someday he would like to go to Fiji. Now that sounds more like a dream, but I know I heard it. I understand some fathers rule the household. Some fathers pontificate about how to live life. Over time, after his second marriage, I understood my father had other identities just waiting to emerge. He still didn't talk much, but with timid courage, as Unitarian minister Bob Patrick says about Woyaya in one's life. My father started over after his divorce in his late 50s. He began pursuing simple things he loved. In the days and weeks that followed that divorce, he slowly birthed a new life. I learned how creative he was. I discovered his parquetry pieces and drawings. My recreated dad smiled, and I saw him take joy in everyday small pleasures he could share with Marjorie. There were square dances, they took ballroom lessons. Sundays, there were church suppers and good home cooking. His new life and hobbies abounded. There was a very large freshwater fish tank in the living room. He had joined the Columbus Aquarian Society. He had given talks at Aquarian Society meetings. My dad taught me how to keep on going. Woyaya, just the way he did.
Thank you. Each week at this time, we make an offering to support the work of this church. The offering is a spiritual practice. It benefits both the recipients and the givers by softening our hearts and helping us exercise the muscles of our generosity. It is a collective affirmation of our shared values and our commitment to the mission of this liberal religious congregation. There are different ways you can donate to the Winchester Unitarian Society. There. You can donate by giving online through our website, the smartphone app Give Plus, through PayPal, or by mailing an actual physical paper check to the Winchester Unitarian Society, 478 Main Street, Winchester, Mass. 01890. Please write or type the date of your offering in the memo line or comment field. Our practice is to invite first-time worship attendees to be our guests. In lieu of a contribution, please complete the virtual visitor card so we can stay connected beyond this Sunday. The offering will now be generously given and gratefully received. Those who wish to do so are invited to join in reading together the community affirmation. We gather not for ourselves alone, but to use our common power to build the beloved community within and beyond these walls. We create and reaffirm this covenant this day to make justice flourish, to practice compassion amidst difference, and to embody transformative love. Let us now join in singing our closing hymn, Woyaya.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there, heaven knows how we will get Woyaya, 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 woyaya. We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Woyaya, 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 woyaya. Woyaya, 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 ya, woyaya, ya, woyaya, ya, woyaya, ya, ya.
We close with these words by Lilia Derlin Jones. For those who came before us, we offer gratitude and thanks. May their memories be a blessing. May we feel surrounded by their love. As we go forth from this place, let us be inspired by their courage, their wisdom, and their dreams. Let us honor them by doing the work, living boldly, loving mightily, and creating heaven on earth. Amen, and blessed be.
Please join us in reading together the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. This service has ended, but our life of service continues. As we acknowledge those who made today's service possible, let us continue our conversation in the chat. After a few minutes, we will go into randomly assigned breakout rooms for unmuted conversation. And shortly after that, not quite sure exactly how long, we will be all invited back to the main Zoom room for a conversation about the service.